in London, England, where they were living at the time, and where Rhys and Sara were serving in a church in central London. And we actually sat in their living room with a small team of people who were hoping to plant a church in Vancouver, in downtown Vancouver. And very happy to say that over the course of these past 14, 15 years, that has all come to pass. And a thriving church in the downtown of Vancouver, which is an amazing thing that has taken place. Barb and I just came back from their family weekend a few weeks ago. We had the privilege of being with their church family. It was just an amazing time together, as this one this weekend will be as well. And so there's lots I could say. I want you to hear from them. And so this evening, let's give a big hand of applause to Rhys and Sara Scott.
Hey, it's just so wonderful to be with you all this weekend. And this is very special for us. And we're going to tell you a little bit of our story. And our hope is not only to connect dots, but to encourage and to just take this opportunity to express our love and our thanks to you as a church. Because as you'll see, you guys have played a very significant part in our story over the last while. So, I want to hop back to 1997. I was living in Brighton, in England, working with somebody that you might know, a guy called Dave Fellingham, and I see smiles. I'd grown up in South Africa, and I was engaged to this gorgeous girl called Sarah. Cute, gorgeous girl. I was just checking that it's this Sarah that I was talking about. And it is this Sarah, yes. And I came out to New Brunswick with Dave Belly and the Stonely Band, and we came out to do a worship conference. And we flew into Bangor, Maine, and I don't know what time it was that you arrived. So Joe Crummy arrived driving a yellow school bus. And I had seen yellow school buses in movies, but I'd never seen one in real life. And so this yellow school bus rolls into the airport at midnight, and we all climb on board, and we're all dead tired. But Joe and I just connected, even on that drive, and I think we spent the whole 4 hours chatting away, talking about what God was doing in them and in us, and just a wonderful sense of this instant connection that just, as I look back on it now, I realize was very much the Holy Spirit connecting us together. And so we did this worship conference called My First Love. And some of you, raise your hand if you were at that conference. I mean, this is amazing. This is amazing. And during that conference, there was a moment where I was lying under a table on the stage, as we did during those conferences. You know, I had started with a guitar in my hands, and at some point the guitar got ditched, and God was meeting with me powerfully, and I found myself lying under this table, looking up. I can remember the oak pattern on the bottom of this table, and I felt God speak to me very clearly in that moment and say, I'm going to call you back to Canada one day, and I have an inheritance for you here. And so that was obviously for me, for us, a very significant moment. And at the end of that tour, I headed back to Cape Town. Sarah and I got married. And Sarah then went on to write her board exams in Cape Town. We got married in the December. That conference was in the October. Back to Cape Town to get married in December. April, Susie wrote her board exams, and then we packed all our possessions into the car, and then we came to the UK, and we were involved in serving a church just outside Cambridge for the next 6 years. Having just arrived in Bishop Stortford, which is where we were living, one Wednesday I went with the other guys in our team, and we went to a leaders' morning, and a guy called Steve Nicholson was speaking at this morning. Steve was a vineyard pastor, and Steve, I got talking to him just before the meeting started, and then he very rudely stuck his hand in my face, and he said, "Stop. I've got something for you, and you're about to blow it." I've never had anyone do that to me before. Actually, I've never had anyone do that to me since. But he, during the meeting, he called me up. He called me and he said, "Would you mind standing up?" And then he read my mail. I mean, it was just, it was quite shocking. Like, he was just saying things that nobody in that room could have known. And then he began to prophesy about church planting. Now, what you've got to know is that this guy was heading up the Vineyard Churches USA church planting. And we had friends who were church planting, and some of our friends would say to us, "When are you and Sarah going to church plant?" And I would say, "Oh, I don't think that's what God has for us. I don't think I'm that kind of guy." And so we get in the car to go home, and the guys are saying, "Wow, that was quite something." And I was like, "Yeah, that really was quite something," until he started prophesying about church planting, and then I think he got it wrong. And so over the following years, Susie and I would see Joe and Angela at Brighton Leaders Conference, and this friendship kept being connected. But we didn't see a lot of you guys apart from those trips. Sarah's going to take it on from there.
Okay, so we were in Bishop Stortford, which is a bit of a mouthful, as you can tell, near Cambridge. It's a tiny little market town, for about 6 years, and our daughter was born there. And then, lo and behold, a couple reached out to us and said, "We're planting a church in London, and we need a team, and we need Rhys."
I think they actually wanted Sarah.
No, they needed Rhys. And so we ended up joining two other couples and moving with our families to central London in 2004. And the bizarre thing is, you make these decisions, and then God reminds you about a prophetic word that you had 6 years before. And so we're in the car driving down to London, and Rhys turns to me and he says, "Maybe, babe, Steve Nicholson was right. We're church planting. How was that?" So we had no intention of ever church planting, and Rhys was a worship leader. So, he wasn't a church planter when we got married. So I thought I'd settle down in a cozy cottage and, live in England for the rest of my life. But that hasn't happened. Nevertheless, our time in London was really quite remarkable. And I think God used it more than anything else to teach us our limitations, to stretch us beyond what we thought we could be stretched, but really to prepare us for the next adventure He had for us. And about 7 years into the plant, the church was well established, and we felt God calling us again to go. We were down at a Brighton Leaders Conference, if any of you have been to those. Or maybe, that's a long time ago. They don't happen anymore, do they? And Dave Devonish gave a word, and he said, for some of you, you need to know it's time to go again. And individually, Rhys and I both felt God really on that word. And so it wasn't long, actually, before we found we were.
So we began to pray at that point. The truth be told, what God had spoken to me about Canada had kind of disappeared out of the back door. And so we began to pray and seek God. And we began to pray particularly about Western Europe. And we were asking God, is there somewhere on the continent that we could plant an English-speaking church? And through planting an English-speaking church, reach native speakers, which is quite possible in cities like Amsterdam or The Hague or whatever. And so we began to pray into that. And then we went to a couple of days of prayer and fasting, and a guy began to pray for us. And he gave me this prophetic word. He said, I see you as an icebreaker. And what I can see is you carving a channel up through the sheet ice. And then I can see boats coming up the channel behind you. And he began to apply it to worship leading. But as he began to speak, I knew this was about Canada. And not too many countries that have icebreakers. So, I thought I was very clever in interpreting what he was saying, but, you might think otherwise. So Canada just came rushing back into our sort of frame of reference, and just so happened that Friday we were flying to Vancouver. We were exploring some things for a sabbatical, and through a series of unexpected events and prophetic words, God spoke to us about planting in Vancouver. And so we went back to London, and we spoke to our team, and the guy who was leading our team said, hey, I get church planting, I get you leading the team, but I don't get Vancouver. It's so far away. And I think there was something of a thrill in our hearts, that there was a sense of feeling like this is new territory for us. This is actually new frontiers. And so it just so happened that we were chatting with Jeremy Simpkins, who, again, you will know, and Jeremy then contacted Joe and said, hey, we've got a couple who are considering moving to Vancouver. He didn't say who it was. Obviously, you guys had this prophetic word about the 12 university towns in the Maritimes and planting churches in those towns. And so we kind of come along and we're like, how about Vancouver? That's in the Maritimes, isn't it? It's maritime, at least. Anyhow, I just remember as we were beginning to process this, knowing that God was leading us, in that sense, to burn the boats and to make decisions by faith. And so I just remember standing on the stage in London and saying to the church, Sarah and I have felt God calling us to move to Vancouver to plant a church. We don't have a team, we don't have money, and we don't have visas. But we feel like God has spoken to us. And so in the back channels, Jeremy contacts Joe and Gary and Kevin and says, hey, we got this couple. And then he says, by the way, it's Rhys and Sara Scott. And knowing nothing of the fact that we had been out in 1997. So we came out in the April and that would have been April 2010. And just to spend a week with the elders and wives and just process, was there a sense of faith together that this was in God's heart? And quite wonderfully, there was such a sense of, yes, we're believing God together for this. And so, long story short, we packed everything up in London. We moved to Fredericton for a month. Tim, I think we stayed in your home that month. Where's Tim? Is that right? You don't remember. And then, having been in Fredericton for a month, we moved to Vancouver. And over those following years, we worked very closely with Joe and Gary and Kevin and Sally and Jody ultimately. And had just, what an incredible privilege it is to do things together. And to have people that you love, that you have your back. We have been through ups and downs. Church planting is a battlefield. You're establishing a beachhead, really in enemy territory, and then you've got to get off that beach, otherwise you'll get pulverized. And so we've been through ups and downs, but over the last 13 years, in the goodness of God and for the glory of God, we've seen a beautiful church family established in that city. And we're beginning to see stuff happening beyond that. We have a church plant out in Cochrane in Alberta, and a number of other things just kind of bubbling away that we're excited about, that God's hand might be in. And so, running forward up to last January, things are going pretty well, and we're excited about where Trinity's at, and we're feeling like, for the first time in, I guess it would have been 12 years at that point, we felt like things were kind of cruising along. And then a friend of ours gave us a prophetic word. He said, I see you on a high mountain, and it's hard. I see you roped together. It's frightening, and I can see that, like, there are mountain ranges below you, and you have climbed mountains before, but it's those mountains below you that you've been on. And now you're on something else, but Jesus is with you. And we were like, things are going pretty well. I don't know what to do with this word. Anyhow, it was just a few weeks after receiving that word that we flew down to be with a church plant in San Diego, California. The day before we flew, I suddenly was losing balance. Couldn't quite stand upright, kept bumping into things on my left-hand side. And so I just thought, maybe I've got an ear infection, maybe it's some kind of vertigo. I don't know, I've never experienced anything like it before. So the next morning we woke up, we got on a plane to San Diego, walked through the airport, and I kept hitting people on my left-hand side. and knocking things over. And it was like, this is so weird. Anyhow, we get down to San Diego. The guys we've gone to meet with, they're like, Rhys, you're not right. And so we went into ER and did a bunch of tests. And at the end of the evening, the doctor called us in and said, hey, you've got a mass on your brain about the size of a golf ball. And we're admitting you. And I was like, well, we were like, please, you can't admit us. We want to go home to Vancouver and we'll get treated there. And so he graciously let us go, and we got on a plane the next day and flew back, and that night. So we went into hospital, and I guess we got into hospital around 6:30 that evening, and they did a battery of tests on me again, and then CT scan, and then at midnight on the Saturday night, the surgeon's resident walked into the ward and said to me, okay, it's cancer, it's a glioma of some kind, we won't know exactly what it is until we get it out, but we've booked you in on Monday afternoon, and you will have it out. And I was like, it's midnight on Saturday, and you've got a surgeon, operating rooms, support staff, anaesthetists, everything for Monday afternoon. You guys are treating this very seriously. So they admitted me at that point, and you know, the crazy thing is that we kind of hit this thing, and of course nothing prepares you for something like this. And so we were thrown. Talking to our kids, just processing. We don't know what this is, but we know it's bad. And then the next morning, I'm lying in the hospital room, and we've been processing how Jesus sent the disciples into the storm. He sent them into the storm. And then he comes walking on the water. And then he says this crazy thing to them. He says, peace, it is I. And you think, what good is that? We're about to die. But it's true, isn't it? It's true. Unless you have authority over the storm. In which case, peace it is I means everything. And as I was there, the peace of God rolled in on my heart. And Jesus climbed into the boat with us. I find it very hard to talk about this without becoming emotional. And it's not emotion because of what we went through. It's not, oh my gosh, the shock, or it's not kind of the trauma of the moment. It's the nearness of Jesus that just blows me away. And I can't talk about it very well.
Try it this way around. My experience of the last year and a half has been parallel, but not exactly the same, as you can imagine. And I'm just going to share a little bit about how God's been meeting with me, or how he did in the very beginning. And for us in our lives, a number of times, God has used the story of Sarah and Abraham to encourage us to do difficult things. And when we were moving to Vancouver, it was one of the stories that he brought up again and again and again. The week that we were fasting and praying, when we were saying, God, really? Are you sure? Are you sure? So far from South Africa? And we just felt him use that story then. And then when the surgeon called us into his office about a month after we'd had the surgery and sat us down, he said, I'm very sorry, I have the worst news you can possibly get. This is what they call a glioblastoma, and it is 14 to 18 months to live. I can't say anything else. And I'm really, really sorry to be the bearer of such bad news. And so we were stunned. It was like, how is this possible? How does this happen? And I remember going out for lunch with Rhys, and we were just sitting there trying to process together. And I was reminded of, we were reminded of Abraham and Sarah again over the next few days, and just of that sense for them of God, He gives a promise, and then they come to the end of their childbearing age. And that's probably what it felt like. And we felt promises of our lives in terms of what God would do. And in many ways, we just feel like we're just beginning. And truly, God only knows. God only knows. And we know that. But stopping in that place and just saying, God, you are always faithful, whether or not we understand what the future holds. And just engaging with the stop at that point was very key for us. And in terms of Abraham and Sarah, they could obviously go to God and say, God, you have promised this. God had promised them a son, and that was very clear for them. And in our situation, not quite so clear. And as I read Hebrews 11, which says, and by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And I really got bound up with that idea of considering God faithful. And what is faith? What does faith look like for us? What does faith look like when you don't have an actual promise? And you're working with the generic promises of God and the generic goodness of God. And I think what God's really taught me over the last year is that faith looks like surrender. Faith looks like saying, I won't let go of believing that God is always good and faithful and merciful and loving and kind. And that He genuinely loves us. And that this situation that we are in the middle of doesn't actually change that. That He knows tomorrow. That He has grace for me now, right now, in the middle of all of this. He has grace for Rhys. He has grace for our daughter and our son. He has grace for our church. And He will have grace for us tomorrow. And He teaches us to live well in the midst of uncertainty. And He will teach us whatever it is that He's got for us when the page turns. Whether He miraculously heals Rhys, which is what we've gone after with all our heart and mind and soul and strength, or whether He chooses not to and He's got a different plan. That our faith, my faith in this, is surrender, but it's not surrender to an unimaginably terrifying outcome or to fear of what is going to happen if he's not around. But it's faith, it's surrender to somebody that I know. It's surrender to somebody that I already trust. Because God has always been faithful. He's been faithful my whole life. And so I can't surrender to somebody that I know and I love, and that I know loves me. And so that for me has been a very significant part of my journey. Learning to trust when everything is shifting sands. Because the one you're trusting on is not shifting sands. He is, as we sang tonight, the solid rock on which we stand. And so He is reliable in the midst of everything else, in the middle of the storm.
I don't know how many times over that first 9 months I heard my wife say out loud, I will not fear. Or I bind that thought. I do not accept that. And I think what I watched was her fighting a battle for her own thinking. For me, when that peace rolled in, from that moment onwards, I've never felt fearful at all, not a moment of anxiety. God just held me through it. It was just incredible. And what I have seen in this is the sense of knowing that God is sovereign over everything that happens, and that God invites us into suffering with Him. But Paul says, "For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe Him, but also suffer for His sake." Now, we want to teach people to believe well. We want to teach people to live well. But we also want to teach people to suffer well, and we want to teach people to die well. And so one of the things that we've walked through has been this question of, what if I die? And I think part of it has been walking through this question of, what authority does cancer have in my life? And very clearly, cancer does not number my days. Jesus numbers my days. And so my days are not in the hands of some tumor. My days are in the hands of my faithful God. And I can trust Him with that. As Sarah has just said, I think watching her fight these battles and seeing her grapple with God, the beauty of it all is that suffering produces something in us which is unlike anything else. It's gold. And there'll be people in this room who've suffered more than we have. You have. And we have to make a decision what we do with our suffering. It can either work for us, or we can allow our hearts to become bitter and angry, and it ultimately produces death in us. But there's this remarkable thing that Paul says, that in our suffering, the sufferings of Christ are filled up. Like, what does that mean? It means that Jesus literally adds our suffering into His suffering. Suffers with us. Is one who walks with us in the reality of our suffering, which is amazing. I get to suffer and I get to receive in the midst of that suffering the goodness of God. And so as we teach people to live well, and we begin to focus on a God who loves us and who is sovereign, we can, in the peace that comes, we can find a deep intimacy with God. Because no longer are we striving and wrestling, what's going to happen? We're saying, God, I trust you. And trust is the basis of intimacy. And so as we find ourselves able to say to God, I release this to you. I release this to you. We find His peace, His presence, His nearness. And that's exactly what's happened with us over this past year. I had someone say to me, one of our church say to me, what do you do? How do you handle, we've been praying for your healing and then you get a bad scan. How do you deal with that? And brothers and sisters, I would say that I have settled in my heart that God is good. When Paul says in Romans 8 that God works all things for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purposes, I look at Him and I say, what kind of good must you be in order to bring good out of what Joseph's brothers betrayed him into slavery? with. Yet God brought incredible good. What kind of good must you be to bring good out of a cancer diagnosis? What kind of good must you be to bring good out of a Roman cross? What kind of God are you? So I have settled in my heart that He is good. And I would just love to encourage you tonight to settle that in your heart. That no matter what you face, it doesn't raise the question, is God good? Is God for me? Does God really love me? No, those questions need to be settled. And we need to be able to say, it is a done deal. The cross says to me, He loves me, He's for me, He will always do me good. And even when the worst nightmare happens in my life, I will believe that He is good and good to me. So I think one of the other things, just briefly to say, is that I feel God's led me to repentance in this season. As I have read the Gospels over and over and over again, in this season, you can't help read healing story after healing story, read deliverance story after deliverance story. And some have said that, when you read the Gospels, Jesus is either on His way to heal somebody, He's healing somebody, or He's on His way back from healing somebody. And what becomes so striking is that Jesus did three things. He preached the good news of the kingdom, He healed the sick, and He drove out demons. He preached the good news of the kingdom. He heralded, He announced something. He healed the sick. He demonstrated that something. He set people free. He demonstrated that something. And I just came to this point of realizing that for much of my leadership, much of my life, I have announced, but I have not demonstrated at the same level that I have announced. And I had to go to God and say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't think I've reflected Jesus in that. And so I'm on a journey at the moment of believing God. And it's so much fun. And we're like, if you're sick, I want to pray for you. If you want to be set free, I want to pray for you. I want to lay hands on you. Now, has everyone got healed? No. In fact, I'm not even sure that I have a gift of healing. I know I've got a gift of faith. We've got other people in our church that really have a gift of healing. I'll bet there's a whole bunch of people in this room who have gifts of healing. And I like to get near people who've got gifts of healing. Because I figure that that's a great way to steal a bit of anointing. And hey, if you've got that, I want a bit of that, what you've got from the Spirit. But I just, this weekend we're gonna announce, and we're gonna dive into some stuff. But I don't want to just announce. I want to live in the place of demonstration, and I believe that our Jesus wants to do stuff among us that cannot be attributed to people. And there's a day I am longing. One of my prayers is that there will be a day that I sit in the office of the surgeon and the oncologist, and I say, can you please explain this MRI to me? Can you explain what's happened in my brain? And then I want to say, I'm going to explain what's happened in my brain to you. His name is Jesus, and He's the ultimate surgeon. And so I'm believing God for that. Whether God takes me, whether He gives me another 30 years of fruitful ministry, which is what I'm asking God for, That's his decision. And I'm cool with it either way. I know he's good in both directions. But I do want to stand before these folk and say, I have a God who heals. I have a God who saves. I have a God who does things that medicine, and all the wonder of what it is, does not have the power to do. I wonder, could we just take 5 minutes? And I think this question of settling the goodness of God is really important. And then maybe even we could just pray for a few people and see what God will do. Is that all right? Yeah, you up for that? So, for the first thing, in terms of the goodness of God, I know that there are lots of us who've gone through stuff that the enemy will get in on the back of and say, that is proof God doesn't love you. That is proof that God isn't really good. And he would try to use all these things. He's a destroyer. He comes to kill, to steal from us, to steal our faith. And there's a battle we have to fight. Like I watched my wife fighting this battle day after day after day. There's a battle we have to fight. But I do believe you can seal something tonight. And so, if you know that you need to settle this in your heart, can I just invite you to stand? Just go for it. Wonderful. Wonderful. Yes. Wonderful. Anyone else? You know you need to settle this question of the goodness of God in your heart. You need to do it today. I feel like there might be a few more of us. Don't be timid. You know what? The reason you don't need to be timid is because you come to a God who already knows. And a God who loves you. And his goal is not to embarrass you. His goal is to come and shower his affection on you and to show you that he is indeed a good God.